The elite don't outwork you. They outthink you. They succeed not through raw effort, but by systematically reconstructing their mental architecture. Here's the truth. Most won't accept. People don't fail because they lack talent. They fail because their habits, emotions, and focus are fundamentally wired to undermine lasting transformation. Stay with me here. Because once you grasp the 21-day mental rewiring framework and recognize the invisible traps that ensnare everyone else, you'll finally shatter the cycles that have been holding you captive. This is the crucial piece we've been building toward in this exploration of mental programming. Here's what you need to understand. After unprogramming, the vast majority of people simply drift. They float aimlessly, they gain awareness, they see clearly for the first time. Most individuals destabilize completely. They strip away inherited beliefs, they challenge old stories, they experience a fleeting moment of liberation. It feels intoxicating initially, but then a harsh reality sets in. Nothing in their external world actually shifts. The same obstacles remain. The same feeling of being trapped persists. They still cannot seem to gain momentum. And this isn't because unprogramming was a failure. It accomplished exactly what it was designed to accomplish. It cleared the debris. But here's the critical part. Unprogramming was never designed to function in isolation. It was merely the opening move. Those who rise to the top understand something the masses never grasp. You are perpetually running a program, without exception. The human brain never functions without default settings. It lacks that capability entirely. When you eliminate one set of defaults without installing replacements, your surroundings will install them for you. Silently, systematically, without seeking your permission. You cannot remain suspended in this neutral, liberated condition. You're constantly being programmed by something, whether you consciously select it or not. What we're examining today is what high performers do in the aftermath. Let me be absolutely transparent about our subject matter. We're not discussing motivation. We're not discussing belief systems. We're not discussing identity. We're discussing control. More specifically, we're examining control over decision-making when pressure intensifies. This is the component nobody reveals. This is the dividing line that separates individuals who awaken and then drift aimlessly for years from those who awaken and immediately begin constructing power. So let's examine why reprogramming isn't optional, why it's genuinely essential if you intend to leverage your awareness. Let me begin with something foundational. Every behavior you repeat is a program. Every reflexive reaction is a program. Every automatic choice you make under duress is a program. These aren't arbitrary. They're systematic, they're embedded, and people harbor this illusion about freedom. They envision freedom as an absence of rules, as simply doing whatever impulse suggests, as existing completely unconstrained. But here's what reality actually looks like. In practice, no rule simply translates to someone else's rules. If you don't select your defaults, your environment will select them on your behalf. And that's not philosophical speculation. That's not some ethereal spiritual concept. It's pure mechanics. It's precisely how the brain operates. Consider your own patterns. Under stress, you automatically engage in certain behaviors. Perhaps you grab your phone. Perhaps you consume food. Perhaps you scroll social media. Perhaps you contact someone. These aren't deliberate decisions in the moment. They're pre-installed responses. Programs are executing, and you installed them at some point, probably without conscious awareness, or more accurately, your environment installed them for you. Now, when you undergo unprogramming, when you evolve into an independent thinker, you eliminate many of these defaults. You cease automatically doing what you were conditioned to do. You cease automatically accepting what you were instructed to believe. And that sensation mimics freedom. But you haven't genuinely liberated yourself. You've simply erased your operating system. And a computer lacking an operating system is non-functional. It accomplishes nothing. So let's discuss why remaining in that condition is genuinely hazardous. Unprogramming eliminates friction, and that can feel satisfying. Elements that previously disturbed you lose their impact. Social pressure that previously controlled you loses its grip, but it simultaneously eliminates stability. And this is the realization people don't reach until they're immersed in it. Without defaults, without those automatic sequences, decision fatigue escalates dramatically. You must consciously evaluate everything. Every minor choice demands deliberation. Emotional volatility intensifies because you lack those stabilizing patterns you previously used to regulate your emotions. You become increasingly reactive. Behavior turns erratic. You might demonstrate discipline one day and complete disorder the next because you lack any framework maintaining your coherence. This explains why numerous people actually feel significantly worse after awakening. They experience heightened anxiety, increased instability, greater chaos than they experienced previously. And they confuse instability with authenticity. They believe this chaos represents them being genuine, being authentic, being liberated, but it doesn't. It's simply instability. High performers regard this phase as profoundly dangerous. They refuse to linger here. They don't celebrate it. They don't construct their identity around it. They transit through it with maximum speed because they recognize that effective operation in an unstable state is impossible. You might possess flawless clarity. You might perceive everything accurately. But if you cannot make reliable decisions, if you cannot regulate your responses, if you cannot perform under pressure, your clarity becomes irrelevant. So let's examine what high performers do differently. The elite aren't sentimental regarding freedom. They don't romanticize it. They're ruthlessly pragmatic about control. They recognize that awareness without structure produces drift, and drift is simply unconscious reprogramming. You're still being programmed. You're simply not selecting what's programming you. So they move with urgency, not toward belief, not toward determining what they now believe, not toward constructing some revised worldview. They move toward discipline. They move toward installing new defaults with deliberation, consciousness, strategy. And this diverges completely from how most individuals approach personal development. Most people believe you must first believe something before you can act on it. You must feel motivated before you can demonstrate discipline. You must transform into a new person before you can perform new actions. The elite know that's inverted. They act first. The emotions arrive later. The beliefs arrive later. The identity arrives later. But the action, the discipline, the new defaults, those arrive immediately. So now we must examine what elite reprogramming actually entails. Because the term reprogramming alarms people. It suggests you're abandoning yourself or becoming someone inauthentic. But that's absolutely not what we're discussing. Let me be exceptionally clear about what reprogramming is not, because this is where most people become confused. Reprogramming isn't affirmations. You're not positioning yourself before a mirror declaring your power. It isn't positive thinking. You're not attempting to sustain some optimistic mindset. It isn't motivation. You're not consuming inspirational content or reading quotes or attempting to energize yourself. The elite don't attempt to feel different first. That's not the entry point. They act differently first. They modify behavior, and emotions adjust subsequently. This is absolutely critical. Most people wait to feel prepared before they alter their behavior. They wait to feel confident before they act confident. They wait to feel disciplined before they act disciplined. And they wait indefinitely because feelings don't lead. Behavior leads. So if reprogramming isn't about feelings or beliefs or motivation, what does it target? Let me specify exactly what elite reprogramming focuses on. Elite reprogramming targets precisely 3 variables. Only 3. Not your complete personality, not your comprehensive belief system, merely 3 specific operational parameters. First, decision latency, how rapidly you decide under pressure. Second, risk tolerance, degree of discomfort you accept without emotional reaction. Third, response under uncertainty, whether ambiguity triggers panic or action. That's it. These 3 variables determine virtually everything about your effectiveness in high-stakes environments. Let me clarify why each one matters profoundly. Decision latency determines whether you can act when action becomes necessary. Individuals with high decision latency, people who require extended time to decide, they forfeit opportunities. By the time they've reached a decision, the window has closed. Risk tolerance determines what caliber of game you can engage with. If you can only tolerate low-risk situations, you're confined to low-reward outcomes. Individuals who can tolerate elevated levels of uncertainty, can pursue opportunities that others cannot even contemplate. Response under uncertainty determines whether you're functional in complex environments, because complex environments are invariably uncertain. If uncertainty triggers panic in you, if ambiguity causes you to freeze, you cannot operate where power resides. These three variables, these are what the elite train relentlessly, not the beliefs, not the feelings, these particular responses. And here's what's remarkable about this approach. Beliefs follow behavior, never the inverse. You modify how you act and eventually your beliefs update to align. You don't need to believe you're disciplined to act disciplined. You act disciplined repeatedly and eventually you believe it. So let's address identity, because this is where most people commence and it's precisely where they should conclude. Most people begin with identity. They initiate by attempting to become someone. I am disciplined. I am confident. I am successful. They attempt to adopt a new identity, hoping that the behavior will follow naturally. The elite never employ this approach. Never. Identity is a lagging indicator. Who you are emerges from what you repeatedly do under constraint, not the reverse. This is why affirmations fail for most people. You're declaring to yourself that you're something your behavior doesn't validate, and your brain recognizes it. There's a disconnect between what you're proclaiming and what you're executing, and that disconnect generates stress, not transformation. But if you modify the behavior first, if you act like a disciplined individual repeatedly under pressure, your identity updates automatically. You don't need to convince yourself. You don't need to affirm it. You simply are that person because you demonstrated it to yourself through repeated action. This is why elite reprogramming disregards identity completely at the outset. It focuses exclusively on behavior, on action, on response patterns. The identity emerges organically after the behavior is installed. So now let's discuss why this process is time constrained, because that's critical to its functionality. Open-ended timelines produce hesitation. Consider what transpires when you tell yourself you're going to change something, but you don't establish a time limit. You negotiate with yourself perpetually. Maybe I'll start tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe after this current project concludes. The elite constrain time deliberately. They establish a fixed window for transformation. A fixed window accomplishes several things. It eliminates negotiation. You're not debating whether to do it. You've committed to doing it for this specific duration. It increases compliance. You can tolerate virtually anything if you know it's temporary. It compresses learning. When you have a compressed timeline, you learn more rapidly because urgency intensifies. 21 days isn't mystical. It's not because it requires 21 days to form a habit. That's actually inaccurate. It's structural. 21 days is sufficient to dismantle old patterns and install new ones, yet brief enough that you can commit to it completely without your brain discovering escape routes. So let's discuss why concentrated, intense cycles work superior to prolonged gradual change. Intensity accelerates adaptation. Your nervous system adapts more rapidly under high intensity than it does under low intensity over extended periods. And here's the crucial element. When the nervous system recognizes that discomfort is temporary, it tolerates significantly more. You can push yourself harder. You can accept greater discomfort. You can follow stricter protocols when you know it's only for 21 days. Optionality is the adversary of change. When you leave yourself options, when you leave yourself escape routes, you'll utilize them. You'll negotiate. You'll make exceptions. You'll rationalize why this particular instance doesn't count. Constraint forces installation. When you remove the options, when you commit completely for a defined duration, the new patterns actually install. This is the complete opposite of how most people approach transformation. They attempt to make sustainable changes, which translates to comfortable changes, which translates to changes that don't actually change anything. They attempt to add one small habit incrementally. They attempt to be gentle with themselves, and they never actually transform because they never apply sufficient intensity. The elite do the opposite. They apply maximum intensity for minimum time. They make the transformation period brutal but bounded, and that approach works. So let's discuss the danger of the alternative. Individuals who are perpetually working on themselves rarely change. And this sounds paradoxical, but it's absolutely accurate. They confuse motion with progress. They're perpetually reading self-development books, perpetually enrolling in courses, perpetually attending therapy, perpetually working on themselves. But if you examine their actual behavior, their actual results, nothing transforms. Why? Because they never commit to a defined protocol for a defined period, execute it completely. They're perpetually exploring, perpetually considering, perpetually processing, but they're never installing. The elite end cycles decisively, they commit to a protocol, they execute it for the defined period, they measure the outcome, they lock it in and advance. No endless processing, no constant self-examination. They modify the behavior, they verify that the change adhered, and they're finished. So now let's examine the actual protocol. Let's discuss what actually transpires during these 21 days because it's divided into 3 distinct weeks and each week has a different objective. Week 1 doesn't build. That's not its purpose. It interrupts. Its sole purpose is to fracture automaticity. You've been operating on automatic patterns for years, perhaps your entire life. Those patterns are deeply embedded. Week 1 is about fracturing them, not replacing them yet, merely fracturing them. Consider what automaticity signifies. It signifies you do things without thinking. Your hand reaches for your phone. Your mind initiates familiar thought patterns. You respond to situations identically to how you always respond. All this transpires below consciousness. Week 1 brings all that to consciousness by interrupting it. This is uncomfortable. It's designed to be uncomfortable because you're fracturing patterns that your brain relies on for efficiency. Your brain wants to operate on autopilot. That's how it conserves energy. Week 1 forces everything into manual mode. Every time you begin to do something automatically, you stop, you pause, you interrupt the pattern. This isn't about executing the correct thing yet. It's merely about not executing the automatic thing. So let's discuss how you actually interrupt default reactions. Here's the core practice of week 1. Every time you feel the impulse to respond immediately, pause. That's it. That's the entire practice. You feel the impulse to check your phone, pause. You feel the impulse to respond to a message immediately, pause. You feel the impulse to eat something when you're not hungry, pause. Delay isn't weakness. This is critical to comprehend. Delay is the insertion of control. Every time you pause between stimulus and response, you're inserting a moment of conscious choice. You're rewiring stimulus-response loops over time. This creates space between what occurs and how you respond. And that space is where control resides. Without that space, you're merely a robot executing programs. With that space, you're a conscious agent making choices. This single practice, if you execute it consistently for 7 days, will transform everything about how you experience yourself. But it requires actually executing it every single time. No exceptions. And that's where most people fail. They execute it when it's convenient. They execute it when they remember. That doesn't work. It must be every single time. So let's discuss another tool for week 1. The elite add friction deliberately. And this is counterintuitive because modern life revolves around reducing friction, making everything convenient, making everything effortless. But friction is a tool for transformation. They decelerate access to comfort. They complicate distraction. They make the automatic things harder to execute automatically. Let me provide concrete examples. If you automatically check social media, delete the apps from your phone. You can still access them, but you must go through a browser. That friction, that additional step, fractures the automatic pattern. If you automatically eat snacks, don't keep snacks in easy reach. Position them somewhere you must think about retrieving them. Convenience weakens discipline. When everything is effortless, when everything is one click away, you never develop the capacity to delay gratification. You never develop the capacity to tolerate discomfort. Friction develops that capacity. Every time you must overcome friction to accomplish something, you're training your nervous system. So week 1 is about adding friction everywhere, making the old patterns more difficult to execute. And that brings us to environmental control, which is how you make this actually work. Do not rely on willpower. This is a mistake almost everyone makes. They believe transformation is about willpower, about being strong enough to resist temptation. But willpower is a finite resource. It depletes. You cannot rely on it. Instead, modify surroundings. Modify your environment so that the correct choices are easy and the incorrect choices are difficult. Reduce input. Limit the quantity of information bombarding you. Unsubscribe from things. Disable notifications. Create space. Limit noise. Quiet your environment physically and informationally. Remove constant stimulation. Your brain requires periods of low stimulation to rewire. If you're constantly stimulated, you're constantly reinforcing old patterns. The elite reprogram environments before minds. They don't attempt to develop discipline in chaotic environments. They clean up the environment first. They make the environment. Support the transformation they want to make. Then the transformation becomes substantially easier because environment is accomplishing half the work. So that's week 1, interruption and stabilization. You're fracturing old patterns and creating baseline stability. Now let's discuss week 2, which is completely different. Week 2 replaces emotion with criteria. This is a fundamental shift in how you make decisions. You stop asking, what do I feel like doing? You begin asking what improves position. This is how the elite think. They don't make decisions based on how they feel. They make decisions based on strategic positioning. Let me explain what this signifies practically. Most people awaken and ask themselves, what do I feel like doing today? And then they do whatever they feel like doing. Their behavior is driven by mood, by emotion, by impulse. Elite behavior is driven by criteria, by predetermined standards for what gets executed, regardless of how they feel. This is a complete rewiring of decision making. You're removing emotion as a primary input. You're not eliminating emotion. You're merely demoting it. Emotion becomes data. It's information about your state, but it's not the authority that makes decisions. Criteria make decisions. So let's discuss how you install criteria-based decision-making. The elite predefine behavior. They don't improvise under pressure. This is critical. Every recurring situation receives a predefined response. You're not determining what to do in the moment. You already decided what to do in that type of situation. Let me provide examples. If someone attempts to argue with you about something that doesn't matter, you already decided how you respond. You don't engage. If you receive an opportunity that doesn't align with your goals, you already decided how you respond. You decline politely. If you feel exhausted in the morning, you already decided what you do. You execute your morning routine anyway. This removes emotional taxation. When you must decide what to do in every situation, you're constantly consuming mental energy on decisions that don't matter. When you predefine it, those situations don't ambush you. You simply execute the predetermined response. Week 2 is about identifying every recurring situation in your life and pre-deciding your response. You're constructing a decision matrix. This situation, this response, that situation, that response. You're removing improvisation from areas where improvisation doesn't add value. So let's discuss how you know this is working. Emotion becomes data, not authority. This is a shift. Your emotions are communicating something about your state. They're information, but they don't determine your behavior. Success is tracked externally. You're measuring results, consistency, follow through, things you can observe objectively. Mood is irrelevant. You felt terrible today, but you executed your protocols anyway. That's a successful day. You felt excellent today, but you didn't execute your protocols. That's a failed day. This is the complete opposite of how most people measure success. They measure based on how they feel. If they feel good, they think they're doing well. If they feel bad, they think something's wrong. The elite disconnect feeling from assessment. They assess based on behavior. Did you do what you said you would do? Did you execute the protocol? Did you maintain consistency? That's the only measurement that matters. Everything else is merely noise. This is challenging for us because we're conditioned to trust our feelings. We're conditioned to believe our emotions are communicating truth about reality, but they're not. They're communicating about our internal state, which is valuable information, but it's not identical to reality. So let's discuss how you reduce the internal debate that makes this challenging. Internal debate is wasted energy. Consider how much time you spend arguing with yourself. Should I do this or should I do that? Maybe I should rest. But I said I would do this, but I'm exhausted. But I committed. This internal debate consumes enormous quantities of mental energy and produces nothing. The elite don't argue with themselves. They make a decision and it's final. This doesn't signify they never modify decisions. It signifies they don't rehash decisions constantly. When a decision is made, the debate is over. Execution begins. This requires practice because most people are addicted to internal debate. They enjoy feeling like they're considering all angles. They enjoy feeling like they're being thoughtful. But most internal debate is merely resistance disguised as consideration. It's your brain attempting to avoid discomfort. Week 2 trains you to make decisions rapidly based on your predefined criteria and then cease thinking about it. Decision is final. Execute. So that's week 2. You're installing decision filters and you're training yourself to make decisions based on criteria instead of emotion. Now we arrive at week 3, which is where everything gets tested. Week 3 removes escape routes. The new program must survive stress because it's irrelevant if you can execute your protocols when everything is calm. What matters is whether you can execute them when things are chaotic, when you're under pressure, when everything is deteriorating. Week 3 deliberately introduces stress. You're not waiting for stress to occur naturally. You're creating it. You're testing the new patterns under worse conditions than you'll normally face. Why? Because if the patterns hold under extreme stress, they'll definitely hold under normal stress. This is how elite training operates in every domain. Military training is more demanding than combat. Athletic training is more demanding than competition. Executive training is more demanding than normal business conditions. You train under worse conditions than you'll face so that real conditions feel manageable. So let's discuss how you actually execute stress exposure. The elite train under worse conditions than reality deliberately. Discomfort isn't punishment, it's verification. If the program survives pressure, it's real. If it collapses under pressure, it wasn't installed properly. What does this look like practically? You add constraints. You reduce sleep slightly. You add time pressure. You increase complexity. You execute your protocols when you genuinely don't want to. When you're exhausted, when you're stressed, when conditions are suboptimal, because those are the conditions where old patterns attempt to reassert themselves. Old patterns are strongest under stress. When you're calm, it's effortless to execute new patterns. But when you're stressed, your brain wants to revert to what's familiar. Week 3 is about proving to yourself that the new patterns are now more automatic than the old ones. You prove that by executing them under stress. This is uncomfortable. It's designed to be uncomfortable, but discomfort isn't damage. You're not harming yourself. You're verifying that the installation is complete. So let's discuss what attempts to sabotage this process. The phrase "just this once" destroys progress. This is the most common way people sabotage their own transformation. They're executing perfectly, and then they think, just this once, I'll make an exception. Just this once, it won't matter. But it does matter because just this once reopens negotiation. The elite eliminates self-negotiation. Rules are rules because they protect stability, not because they're perfect rules, not because they're the only possible rules, but because consistency is more important than optimization. At this stage, you're installing patterns. Patterns require repetition without exception. Every exception teaches your brain that the rules are negotiable. And if the rules are negotiable, you're back to debating every decision. You're back to relying on willpower. You're back to the state you were in before you started. So week 3 is about closing all negotiation loops. No exceptions, no just this once, no special circumstances. And when you execute that, when you execute without exception for 21 days, something interesting transpires with your identity. By now, behavior is automatic. You're not thinking about it anymore. You're not forcing yourself. You're merely doing it because that's what you do now. And identity emerges quietly. No affirmation required. You don't need to tell yourself you're disciplined. You simply are because you demonstrated it to yourself repeatedly under pressure. This is identity locking. Your self-concept updates to match your behavior, not because you convince yourself with words, but because you proved it with action. This is genuine identity transformation, not aspirational identity. Not who you want to be, but who you actually are based on what you actually execute. And this identity is stable because it's based on demonstrated capacity. You know you can execute under pressure because you did it. You know you can maintain consistency because you did it. This isn't faith, it's evidence. So now let's discuss what actually changes after these 21 days are complete. What changes after 21 days? Not happiness. This doesn't make you happy. Not confidence, at least not in the emotional sense. Instead, you notice faster decisions. You're making decisions in seconds that previously required hours or days. You notice lower emotional volatility. Your mood doesn't swing as dramatically because you're not being controlled by emotion anymore. You notice predictable behavior. You execute what you say you would execute. Other people begin to notice this too. You become reliable. This is control. This is what elite reprogramming produces. Not better feelings, better functioning. You operate more effectively under pressure. You make better decisions faster. You maintain consistency regardless of how you feel. This is the difference between someone who's undergone this process and someone who hasn't. It's not that they're smarter or superior. It's that they're more controlled. They're operating from installed defaults that serve them instead of operating from inherited defaults that don't. So let's discuss why most people will never execute this. Because discomfort feels threatening. Most people avoid discomfort at all costs. They interpret discomfort as danger. They interpret discomfort as something wrong. So when the process becomes uncomfortable, which it will, they stop. They tell themselves it's not working. They tell themselves it's too difficult. They tell themselves it's not for them because old identities resist replacement. You've been who you are for an extended time. That identity feels like you even if it doesn't serve you. It's familiar. Changing it feels like losing yourself. So people cling to old identities even when those identities limit them because discipline removes drama. This is subtle but important. Many people are addicted to emotional drama. Their life is a series of ups and downs, crises and resolutions, emotional swings. Discipline flattens that. Life becomes more stable, more predictable, more controlled, and that can feel boring to people who are accustomed to chaos. The elite accept this cost. They accept that discipline means less drama. They accept that control means less emotional variety. They accept that stability might feel boring. They accept it because they care more about outcomes than feelings. So let's discuss why this works long term. Behavior rewires belief. You don't need to believe you can accomplish something before you do it. You do it, and then you believe you can do it. Consistency creates identity. Who you are is who you repeatedly show yourself to be through action. Stability enables expansion. Once you have a stable foundation, you can build on it. You can take bigger risks. You can pursue bigger opportunities. This is why the 21-day protocol is so powerful. It creates a new baseline. You're not constantly managing yourself anymore. You're not constantly fighting yourself. The new patterns are automatic. That frees up enormous quantities of mental energy for other things, for strategy, for growth, for building power. This is the foundation everything else builds on. Without this, without installed functional defaults, you're always going to be fighting yourself. You're always going to be unstable. You're always going to be limited by your own inconsistency. So let me bring this all together now. Unprogramming removes false limits. It clears away the inherited beliefs and assumptions that constrain you. Access restores interface. It positions you inside systems where you can actually have influence. Reprogramming installs functional defaults. It provides you the operating system you need to execute effectively under pressure. This is the complete arc. This is how you move from wherever you are to possessing actual power, not power in the abstract. Not power someday, power now. Power that you can utilize. Power that comes from your ability to control yourself under pressure and execute consistently toward your goals. Most people never complete this arc. They become stuck in one phase. They awaken, but they don't position themselves. Or they position themselves, but they don't install functional defaults. Or they attempt to install defaults, but they don't do it intensely enough for it to adhere. The elite complete all three phases quickly, deliberately, with maximum intensity. So let me close with this. Freedom isn't the absence of structure. Freedom is selecting the structure you operate inside before the world selects one for you. That is what the elite understand. That's what this 21-day phase is designed to install. You are going to be programmed. That's not optional. The question is whether you choose the programming or whether it happens to you. Whether you install defaults that serve your goals or whether you absorb defaults from your environment. Whether you build functional patterns deliberately or whether you drift into dysfunctional ones unconsciously, the 21-day protocol provides you a way to install your own programming, to choose your own defaults, to build your own operating system. It's not easy, it's not comfortable, but it works, and that's all that matters. In the next session, we'll discuss what you execute after these 21 days, how you maintain the new patterns, how you build on this foundation, how you use your new capacity for control to actually build power in the real world, because control is merely the beginning. What you do with that control is what actually matters.